Part 3 explains two attributes of X. The third condition is that there are no contradictions in the moral values that X gives. If there were, then those moral values could not be absolute. The person who meets condition 1 believes that their moral values are absolute, and therefore must accept that whatever gave them their moral values does not make contradictions. This falls into the modus tollens format of deductive logic. To explain why premise 1 is true, imagine if your parents told you when you were little that stealing was absolutely wrong. Then later, they told you that stealing was morally right in some situations. If your parents are X, then neither of the moral values they gave you are absolute because neither one of them are true all the time. This is because they contradict one another, and the same is true of X. A morally contradicting X cannot give absolute moral values. The fourth condition is that X cannot be man. The basic reasoning for this is the same as before, which is that an X that is man cannot provide absolute moral values. This violates condition 1, so the person who accepts condition 1 must also accept condition 4. Premise 1 will be defended in the next slide. The left-hand column lists some theories that man has proposed that explain how man came to be the source of absolute moral values. In each theory, there is a motivation for practicing the moral values in it, which is given in the next column over. In Kantianism and contradictorianism, the motivation is to preserve society. In other words, societies that practice certain moral values like don't steal, don't kill, don't lie, treat others with respect, tends to last longer than the societies that don't. In utilitarianism and Aristotle's virtuous man, the motivation is to make people happy. Again, certain moral values, which are usually along the lines of treating others with respect, make yourself happy and make others happy. Lastly, in Darwinian evolution, morality is an adaptation that helps your species survive. The third column poses the question, can these moral values theoretically change? To which the answer is yes. Remember that an absolute moral value cannot change, even theoretically, so these moral values cannot be absolute. One might object, saying something like, the moral values that preserve the species stay the same throughout history. Societies who don't lie, cheat, and steal from one another last longer than those who don't. And that has always been the case, and it will always be the case. So these moral values are absolute. Now the point I'm making is that in theory, not necessarily in actuality, what preserves society could change, leading to a change in moral values. Our moral values can theoretically change as long as they are based on something that can theoretically change, which makes them not absolute. To illustrate this, imagine a virus that is so deadly that if unchecked will wipe out the entire human species. It's also in its early stages and you know where the epicenter is. The only way to stop it is to completely wipe out the people within a 500-mile radius of its epicenter. If what defines a morally right action is that it preserves society or preserves the species or makes a lot of people happy, then it would be morally right in this case to commit genocide. Your only other option is to have the species wiped out by the virus. Normally, committing genocide would not preserve the species, but since what preserves the species has changed, so has the moral merit of genocide. So that's an example of how man-made systems of morality can theoretically give moral values that contradict, which makes them not absolute. At this point, one might object, saying something like, it isn't the behaviors themselves that are absolutely right or wrong, it's the motivations for the behaviors. For example, preserving society is absolutely right, even if preserving society takes on different forms. So in the case where there is no virus, not committing genocide is morally right because society would be better preserved. And in the case where there is a virus, committing genocide is morally right because it too is what best preserves society. The problem with this objection is that there is no basis for saying that any of these motivations are morally right. In fact, it would be circular to say that preserving society is morally right because moral rightness is what preserving society is attempting to explain. You can't assume what you're trying to prove. Or let's put it this way. You have a moral value, and there's a reason for practicing that moral value. There is no way to judge the moral merit of the reason for practicing the moral value, because the moral values by which to judge its merit haven't been invented yet. There's an additional problem posed by Darwinian evolution, in that in Darwinian evolution, all species are seen as equal, so there is no moral basis for preserving one species over another. Doing so is known as speciesism, or a bias toward one's own species. We see that when man is X, not only can the moral values he provides change, thus rendering them not absolute, but the very basis for practicing them is not morally good. Therefore, man cannot be X. That concludes Part 3. Part 4 will discuss the implications of the attributes of X.